free the Big Ten, says an NFL coach. Heather and Paul and Mike T is here. Paul, I'm going to start with you. I mean, you've got the president of the United States putting them on the 1 yard line, and you got NFL coaches saying free the Big Ten. Think about that. What's the opposite of free? What can you imagine what is going on? How would you put this into perspective?
This might be the first time in my life I've ever agreed with a Harbaugh. I think that was fantastic. I mean, it was. That's what you want from a brother, and he's right, and that's why this story becomes so confusing and disillusioning. And I realize, Greeny, we all realize why the Big Ten seemed to go the direction it did. It just went too early, and I know I say that every time we have this conversation, but at some point the Big Ten needs to give us a roadmap other than we had an 11-3 vote and we're not returning immediately because college football is starting. I mean, there are games tonight, and there are high school games in Ohio. There are going to be college games in Ohio. There's going to be NFL games in Ohio, but the best team in Ohio, the most famous team in the Big Ten, is not going to play, and nobody has been able to explain why not, other than we shut down on August 11th.
Yeah, and again, the pressure is just remarkable. Heather, what are you hearing from people inside there?
Well, Greeny, a Big Ten head coach texted me last night and echoed those sentiments, saying all coaches in the Big Ten want to play, and we are doing everything we can to get our teams back on the field as soon as possible. But it's a stark difference in terms of the coaches' mentality between the Big Ten and the Pac-12, which, as you know, also isn't playing. I talked to USC coach Clay Helton earlier this week, and he told me you have to be able to look at it through a father's eyes and say, you know what? This may not be the right time right now to do what we love. He said you have to respect the information and the decision that comes along with it.
That's an extraordinarily good point. I had David Shaw on my radio show, the coach of Stanford. He told me the reaction of his players was one of gratitude when they called off the season. Meanwhile, in the Big Ten, they're literally suing. People in the Nebraska kids are suing the Big Ten Conference. That's quite a juxtaposition. Mike T., you made an interesting point this morning. You know Kevin Warren, who's the commissioner of the Big Ten. I don't know what he was expecting, but obviously it hasn't gone the way he was expecting. What do you think of this whole thing?
Yeah, Greeny, when he made the decision, I'm sure he was assuming that when he looked to his left and he looked to his right, the Big 12, the ACC, and most importantly, SEC was going to walk shoulder to shoulder with him. And when he took a step forward and they didn't, now they're panicking. And here's where the pressure point is specifically. Everybody's really worried about this year, and obviously we should be. However, when you talk to the player personnel directors of all these schools, it's about recruiting. And just to be specific, when you think of about Jeff Hafley, he left Ohio State. He's establishing himself at Boston College. Mac Brown at North Carolina. They have tremendous opportunities to close the gap with the Big Ten schools in terms of recruiting if the Big Ten winds up not playing. So I think for Kevin Warren, I think he assumed that those conferences were going to be with him. And now that they're not, the pressure is bubbling up from the football programs, not just because of this year, but they are getting eviscerated in terms of recruiting for next year and the year after.
Yeah, Heather, let's go back. We were talking so much in the lead up to this about the conferences wanting to be together as much as they could. They kept having these meetings of the commissioners, and now they act and the others don't. Where does that all fit into this equation?
Well, college football, Greeny, is probably more fragmented than it has ever been. And American Athletic Conference Commissioner Mike Oresco and I talked about that. And he says that he wishes it weren't that way. And, you know, usually they are all in lockstep and talking. And it's just that has simply changed. And they are doing what's best for their own conferences. But Greg Sankey in the SEC, John Swofford, and Bob Bowlesby, they are still going forward pretty much together.
Paul, final word.
Yeah, well, Kevin Warren did this to himself because back in July, Greeny, he had a Zoom meeting in the morning with the other 4 Power 5 commissioners, and without telling them, he went out that day and announced that he was going conference only, and it was never the same after that. So he has no one to blame but himself. He made this decision. If he expected the rest of the college football to come with him, then he is in for a long tenure as that commissioner because that was a stupid mistake, and he was naive, and I think he is all of those right now.